housing prices in the US. Trying to make sure my audio is good here. Testing. Yeah, audio's looking great. And that's good for you, because now you can hear my dulcet tones ringing out to you and giving you all the information that you need to know to be the best that you can be with personal finances. Now that stated, in the United States, there's been a little bit of a problem with houses, property in general, just rising in cost, locking out your average home buyer, your average investor, and especially new home buyers, new investors. So younger millennials and Gen Z types, they're feeling the crunch, unable to get into that first part of the American dream. What's the reason for that? Is there a reason for that? Can it be solved? Let's take a look at all those questions in this video. You know what this is. Finance Squared, Derek West. Like, subscribe, click the notification bell. Make sure you have post notifications turned on wherever you're viewing this video. But let's dive into the details. What's going on with the cost of homes? What's going on with property in general? Why are the values, why are the costs of homes rising to such an extent? There's a number of reasons for that. And one of the things we can start with is like current trends, the trends that have been happening for like the last 3 to 4 years. And I'm sure you guys know everybody's favorite economic phenomenon, inflation. That's been driving a lot of the pain being felt by your average home buyer, right? Particularly interest rates. You see, when inflation goes up, that means the money supply is generally rising faster than the amount of goods and services in an overall economy. And this typically happens unevenly. Some goods and services don't see much rise in price at all. Others see tremendous rise in price. But generally speaking, when there are more goods and more services, the value of money stays relatively the same. But generally speaking, and at a high level, without deep diving too much into the details, because inflation is a very complicated subject and very few people understand it, especially economists. But you can think of inflation as just the amount of money that any economy has at any one time. And that amount of money should be chasing a certain amount of goods. If the goods and services in that economy, if they increase and the money supply increases proportionally, then inflation should generally be zero. If, however, the money supply increases faster than the amount of goods and services in an economy, then inflation is going to rise. And if goods and services increase at a faster rate than the money supply increases, you're going to have a tight money environment. And in some instances, you may experience deflation. When inflation is high, our economic policymakers, particularly our Fed Chairman, Jerome Powell, and the chairman of the Feds around the country, they're responsible for setting interest rates on certain economic metrics. We can dive into the specifics of those in a separate video. But increasing those interest rates influences the interest rates that banks who borrow money from the Fed will increases the interest rates that banks will charge their customers, other corporations, and consumers. That's what's influencing the interest rates for homes in the United States. So what was before, let's say 5 years ago, a 2% interest rate on a mortgage for a 30-year term, you're now getting a 7% interest rate on a mortgage for a 30-year term. One thing that I think is interesting is that that's not even the highest interest rate that we've seen in the last 40 years. There have been interest rates eclipsing 11%, 15%. I'm not going to verify that for you and put that in the screen down below. This interest rate environment is not the worst that we've ever seen. Nevertheless, it's causing home buyers to be squeamish about purchasing new homes, particularly, like I said, your younger millennial and your Gen Z type. But if we're being honest with each other, that's not the only reason that home prices are increasing and really freezing out your younger millennial and your Gen Z individual. There's a couple of other things that are causing this problem to just fester. Let's go over some of those. You can generally break these down into 3 separate categories. The consumer's taste in homes, your home buying consumer's general investing and saving habits, and then there's public policy for homes. We talked about one of those public policies, federal interest rates, just a second ago. There are other components to it, and we're going to dive into those in a second. But let's talk about the consumer's taste in homes. You see, over the last, let's say 25 years or so, I've seen a general trend in the uptick of the desire for luxury goods of all kinds, luxury cars, luxury accessories, watches, bags, shoes, clothes, having luxury exotic vacations. This trend has also found its way into the home buying culture. And one of the things that I like to talk about on this channel is that keeping your housing costs as low as possible is one of the greatest ways to have a increasing wealth and to set yourself on a path to increase your wealth as much as possible. And one of the ways to do that is to sort of avoid luxury goods as much as possible. We all like nice things, right? You need to pick and choose the things that are nice to you and sort of forget about the rest of all the other stuff and sort of minimize your consumption of luxury goods, because it's generally a markup for a product that, if we're all being honest with each other, is relatively the same, particularly if you don't care about the brand. So for example, your typical shoe that you can find at, let's say, a shoe warehouse outlet at your local mall, it's probably just as good, as you're gonna find from a typical luxury shoe manufacturer. Gucci. I'm not even sure of all the luxury shoe manufacturers that we have in the country. I'm sure you can name off a million of them, but generally speaking, they're gonna keep your feet dry, help you to walk wherever you need to go. I'm not much of a shoe connoisseur. I know that quality matters, so I buy quality shoes. I don't buy luxury shoes. And I try and keep my shoe buying to a minimum. But I know people that are obsessed with shoes. Then there's the female shoe side. I'm not gonna get into that. That's a whole separate video. But expensive luxury items, not just limited to your accessories. People like luxury cars. I'm a little bit of a luxury car connoisseur myself. There's a whole other video there as well, like whether or not buying luxury cars is worth it in the end. But the trend extends even to people's home buying tastes. Homes are no longer seen as just a roof over your head, a place to lay your hat, somewhere to store your stuff and hang out with your family and friends and just kick it. A lot of people need a nice home. 4 bathrooms, vaulted ceilings, quartz countertops. But that's the consumer's tastes, and the consumer's tastes are driving up those costs. Now I said there are 3 things that are driving up the consumer's costs, right? The consumer's tastes, public policy. But then we also need to consider the public's habits for saving and investing. That's us, the people. How we think of our saving and investment strategies. I'll be honest with you, most of the people that I talk to that have any sort of mind to invest, save, etc., they believe that their primary investment is their home. And in all honesty, that's probably a truthful statement for, let's say, 60-70% of the general population. Most of the population has very little savings. Most of the population has very little invested. Of those that do have things that are invested, their biggest investment tends to be their home. So the truth is, the market for purchasing homes is enormous, and there are a number of things that are driving this market. But at the same time, there are things that are getting in the way of the supply of the market, of the supply side of this market. And that takes me to the first point that I made earlier. Public policy is also helping to drive the costs up. And a lot of people tend to think it's a partisan issue. For example, California, homes in California are continuing to be driven up, and a lot of individuals think that their public policy in California is driving it to a large extent, and they're right. But at the same time, if you look at Texas, if you look at Florida, if you look at places where the public policy is exactly opposite, home prices are also going up. And in those instances, public policy is driving those costs up as well. In places like California, there's more of a push for specific housing types, especially for limiting the housing supply. This speaks to the second point. In general, if your home is your primary investment, you are going to favor, and you will favor, home prices rising in general. You're not going to want your home to sort of stay middling at the price that you purchased it at, and heaven forbid the value of your home falls over the time that you own it. You're going to want policy in place to help to drive the cost up. In California, that implements itself in a lot of restriction on the supply of homes. In places like Texas and Florida, home values are largely driven by local zoning policy. These policies create and increase the supply of the type of homes I talked about a little bit earlier. Luxury homes. Homes that have lots of square footage, lots of acreage, and that also limits the supply of homes that can be had. The last public policy that we're going to discuss is really seemingly unrelated to homes in general. But if you think about it, the demographic that's having the hardest time getting homes right now, younger millennials, Gen Z, the public policy that's affecting them is their student loan interest rates, right? Student loans have been driving up the cost of college. The cost of college in general has been skyrocketing since before I got into school. It's probably going to keep going up until there's some policy change that minimizes the utilization of student loans. And as you can see, student loans have been driving up the cost of education, even for degrees that aren't really worth it. Now, I'm gonna have an entire video on whether or not higher education is worth it. So make sure you're liked and subscribed with those notifications turned on. That stated, the burden of student loans is one of the reasons why younger individuals tend to put off purchasing a house longer and longer. So the correlation between student loans and home prices seems unrelated to a large degree. And that, I would say, is rather accurate. But I will say this, one of the reasons why I talked about earlier, inflation is going up and up and up, is we talked a little bit about the reason why inflation exists, right? The supply of money moving faster than the available amount of goods and services. In our current culture, where debt is the way to do things, one of the consequences of that is that people are more willing to take out debt for a ton of their purchases, from things as simple as your weekly groceries, right? One of the things that we talked about on this channel is putting your known needs-based spending on a credit card so that you can get the reward perks. That is technically a way of borrowing from the bank, and hopefully, if you're following best practices, you're paying that balance off in full every time as soon as possible, so you're not incurring any interest payments. That's just one way that we're being inculcated into a lifestyle of debt. And another way that we're being inculcated into a lifestyle of debt is to get and take out student loans, is to take out loans for our education. And that drives up the cost of said education, putting a greater burden on those that graduate from college, causing them to delay their home purchases. And that delay in home purchases normally would decrease the demand for homes. But because people that already have homes treat them as one of their saving vehicles, and frankly, the rise in the popularity of owning more than one home, particularly to rent it out and to get a little bit of extra passive income. That helps keep the demand for homes up. And it's a little bit of a vicious circle where debt creates more debt, and that debt drives demand, and that demand drives the prices ever higher. So we're in a little bit of a quagmire here, and there's gonna be very little ways to get out of this circle of this flywheel of debt. One of the ways that I think you should consider this, however, is really thinking about making sure that your living expenses are as low as possible. So one of the reasons that I tell people that I don't buy a home is because a lot of the homes around me are expensive, too expensive, where it would cause my living expenses to become askew and to deviate from my plan to increase my wealth. I talked a little bit in another video about what the right home expense ratio should be. You should see a link to that video popping up on your screen right now. Public policy is gonna have to change. We're gonna have to think about how we zone. We're gonna have to think about whether or not it's a good idea to have interest mortgage deductions on our taxes. That's one of many ways that we're artificially driving demand for homes. But for now, yes indeed, the average home buyer, particularly younger millennials, are starting to get priced out of the home buying market. But there are ways around it, particularly keeping your home expenses and living expenses low. I have a video on that. Be sure to check that out. If you got any value out of this video, like, subscribe, and click the notification bell. Don't forget, a goal without a plan is a wish. A goal with a plan and no action is a wish list. I'll catch you guys in the next video. I'm Derek West. This is Finance Squared. Take it easy. Peace.